in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Wow. Charlotte, North Carolina. And what's the weather like for you?
It's gray and rainy, which makes it quite interesting when we don't have anywhere else to go.
That is true. And as I was telling Julie, when we brightness is actually sunshine coming through my window in Seattle, of all places, where the Lord's giving us some sun in Washington because we need it right now. So we're so glad you guys are here. And I am so honored to be able to finally talk with Julie. We met through a group called Hope Writers, probably about maybe a little over a year ago.
A year and a half ago, I think, yeah.
Yeah. And so you guys are going to love hearing from Julie. Julie is an author, a podcaster. We're going to share a little bit about her new podcast that just started. She's a Bible teacher, a confidence coach, and an entrepreneur. And she's been married to her husband for 23 years, who is graciously at this time letting her have some quiet time because she has 4 boys and 2 are now home. And what I was talking to Julie about a little earlier before we went on is Julie's passion is wanting to help people move from mundane and meandering life to a vibrant and meaningful one. And right now, I bet you're having a pretty vibrant life with 2 of your boys at home.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you share a little bit about your boys?
Well, the twins are old. I've got 4, like Cheri said. The twins are older and they're out pursuing their own lives. But I've got 2 at home still. One is 17, and he reminds me every day that he's going to be 18, even though it's 6 months away. But and then he's special needs, and then I've got my 11-year-old little caboose at home.
Aww.
So yes, he tells me I'm the reason, or he's the reason I color my hair.
Yes, we all have reason. Yes. That's our kids should buy stock in hair coloring companies.
Yes. Right.
So Julie and I had so much to talk about today with what's going on. Everyone's having a lot of fear and anxiety, and we're going to talk about her podcast. She started a podcast recently called, and I might say this wrong, so Kairos.
Yeah, right.
Yay, Kairos Moments. And I love the tagline that you use on that, which is God moves, we respond, and everything changes. And that is just so powerful. Mm-hmm. And I'd love for you to share a little bit of where that came from and what God is showing you through these Kairos moments.
Sure. Well, first of all, Kairos is the Greek word for time. And it's not the time that you can measure by the clock. It is a significant moment within time. And in biblical terms, it's the time when God intersects our lives and he has something that he wants us to learn or to grow from or to change or whatever. And so those moments can pass us by unless we're really paying attention to them. I've had numbers of Kairos moments pass me by and I look back and I'm like, oh, that's what the Lord meant when he was prompting me with that. And so, so Kairos moments, and I even homeschooled my twins and we had to name our school and I named it Kairos Academy. Wow. So I've had this fascination with Kairos time for a long time, but I want to help people recognize those moments to be able to grab a hold of them and not miss those opportunities for growth and to get to know God a little better. I mean, it does, when we do, not only do we recognize them, but we need to respond to them.
Yes.
There's action involved. And then whatever that area that God's talking to us about, that has the potential to change drastically.
That is just so powerful. There's so many of those moments throughout the day. And I think we're often looking for the Red Sea to part or the sky to open or a cloud of fire. And yet it's right there in front of us.
Yes.
This is off topic, but it makes me think of it. I went to the grocery store yesterday at 6 a.m. I was brave. And,
yes, you were.
And there was the sweetest gentleman, probably a little bit younger than my dad. And he wanted to buy 2 boxes of Kleenex and they wouldn't let him. They 1 box of Kleenex only.
Oh my goodness.
I know. And so I bought the Kleenex, put it in my cart, and just handed him the Kleenex box. And
Yeah.
those are the little moments. Those are the little moments that God says, move. Okay, move. And it's not earth shattering or shaking.
Sometimes they can be, but not always.
Kleenex. It can be. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. But a box of Kleenex.
Yeah.
And if we aren't paying attention to little things, we can miss them. So that is so powerful. On your most recent podcast, and I'm going to be putting links, show notes, there'll be links on here to Julie's podcast and her website, so you guys can go on and share. But you talked to Tiffanys Johnson, and I'm not sure when you interviewed her, but the timing of that podcast coming out is so relevant because Tiffanys Johnson is the girl that was attacked by a shark. So, you're talking about fear. And I love how you guys talk about how God's joy in spite of our circumstances. And you talk about Romans 8:6, when our mind is governed by the flesh. And I just wonder if you could share a little bit about that podcast with Tiffanys.
Sure. She, I don't even know how I met her, but we both consider it just a connection that God ordained because we're friends and we just, we're just good in that way. But she was with her husband cruising in the Bahamas, and they were snorkeling, and her husband left the water for whatever reason, and she turned around. She felt like she bumped into something. She turned around, and her arm was in the shark's mouth. And when she realized what was going on, she was trying to scream, but of course she had the mask on her face, and so it was just garbled. No one could hear her. And she was, there was a lot of thrashing going on, and the shark, when she finally got her arm released, half of it was gone. And just the miracles that happened to get her to the boat, to get her to, she should have died because she was bleeding out, and it was 30 minutes to the hospital. And but she's got such a joy and a peace about her that it's rare in spite of her circumstances. I mean, she admits that things are hard, learning how to do things with one arm is going to be hard, but she's passionate about having Jesus's light being shown through her. And it just, she's amazing. She has a ministry, and it's called Be an Overcomer. And I think we need to surround our kids, people like this, because I hear I can't a lot from my youngest, especially. And I'm like, honey, don't tell me you can't, and then I'll, share the story. And she, she just has an awesome testimony. She talks about how she felt surrounded by the enemy. When she was trying to swim back to shore, she felt she was dealing with a little bit of fear that the shark was right behind her and was going to take her under. And so that's what fear does, right?
It's like a real life Jaws moment.
Yes. It makes us imagine the worst. Fear, you've heard that acrostic or acronym, whatever it is, false evidence appearing real.
Ooh, that's good.
So she was imagining the shark coming after her and taking her down. But when she finally got to her senses, she said, "No, I'm not going to die here. You are not taking my life." And the Spirit of the Lord rose up within her. And she credits that to what happened before the shark attack. She was spending time with the Lord. He was filling her and strengthening her. She didn't know she was going to be attacked by a shark, but that's what came out when that trial happened to her.
Yeah, that it is so relevant metaphorically and everything with what's going on right now. We feel like we're drowning. We feel like something's coming behind us, that the next thing is going to grab us. And it was just such a perfect timing podcast. And in Romans 8:6 that you guys talk about on there, the mind governed by the flesh versus the mind governed by the Spirit. And how, we keep being told in the Bible, don't lean on your own understanding. The mind governed by flesh. It is just, we are so terrified. And there are so many people that don't understand the peace that passes understanding. And
Right.
we have
I mean,
got
it
to
doesn't
get,
make sense.
it doesn't make sense. We've got to get the message out about what that peace is. And when I was teaching a youth group at one time, there was something going on at the school that they were scared, no, and they were trying to grasp, like, what is this peace that we keep being told at church classes and school classes? It's a Christian school. And it reminded me of a time when my little kids were little, and they'd be in an atmosphere that was a little, a social gathering, a large gathering of people, and they're kneecap height.
Yeah.
And so all they see is a bunch of kneecaps, loud
Yep.
noises, strangers bending down and getting in their face. And all they would do is they'd put their hands up and they'd say, "Mama, I hold you." And I'd pick them up and I'd hold them, but the situation didn't change at all.
That's good.
They were still in that same environment, the same noises, the same chaos, but they were being held. And that is the only way I can describe the peace that passes understanding. Is, as children of God, we can lift our hands up and say,
"Oh yeah,
God, I hold you."
Yeah.
Hold me. And
Right.
with Tiffany in that podcast, that's what I kept thinking, was she kept saying how she had this peace. And I was like, man, you just
She
got your
was even
arm.
more peaceful than her husband was.
Yes.
And she was able to, she had the wherewithal to tell him what to do to help her, put the tourniquet on her arm. And I think God's peace is like our inheritance.
Yes.
Yeah. So
hey, Melinda's joining us, and I like what she just said. Melinda's a mutual friend of ours, which is so cool in this world. It's not the day of battle, but the way we spend our days before the battle.
Yes.
And you say that God moves, we respond. And you talk about it's their purpose has already been established. God created them to be in intimate fellowship with Him. And I love when you say, God doesn't use you. I love how you say that, how you say God doesn't use you.
Yeah. It might be semantics for some people because, God does use us per se, but it's just, it's almost like it has a bad connotation. It kind of sheds a bad light on God to say He uses me, because I've been used by people. We all have, and we don't like that feeling. And I know He uses us for good, but I actually rather think, and I think this is true in my heart, that He invites us to participate in His story. What He's already doing, He's inviting us to participate in that. And that is just, because it just seems like it's more of a relationship more than Him using me.
Right.
So like I said, it might be semantics for some people, but it's just my relationship with God. He invites me and I respond. I have the choice to respond to His invitation. Yeah.
And where our ministries intersect, I talk a lot about Ephesians 2:10, that, it says we were created with a purpose ahead of time. Before, ahead of time. God is so intentional. He did not create us and then go figure it out.
Right.
Or what have now that I've made Julie, let's see, what calling should I give her?
Right.
And you put in, I'm looking through my notes quickly, but you talk about He invites us into collaboration. He invited us to be called to do things with Him, to be His disciples. And in one of your podcasts, I think is episode number 2, you talk about how God's voice and His actions aren't always obvious. Sometimes they're in a whisper. And go ahead and explain.
Well, it was in the story of Elijah, and he was in the cave. He was hiding after that big battle with the prophets of Baal. He was hiding, and he needed a word from the Lord. He needed to know the Lord's closeness. And the earthquake came, and God wasn't in the earthquake. The wind came, He wasn't in the wind. And I think there was one other thing, but then the gentle whisper of the Lord. And that's when Elijah recognized him. And Stephen Furtick and Torrin Wells, the artist, the musician, they have a song on Torrin's new album. And Stephen Furtick does the prelude. And it's about what I just spoke about, that scripture with Elijah. And Stephen asked God, why did you whisper? And this could make me cry. He said, I whispered because I'm close. And that's why God whispered. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm done. Yes. Because, it's not in the big booming things. Sometimes God is so close, so near, so intimate with us. He just whispers. And we have to tune our spirits to be able to hear him when he whispers. Otherwise we might miss it.
Yeah.
Because it's not always obvious.
Oh, I love that. So God moves.
Mm-hmm.
We respond. And how does it look like? How did it look like for you when everything changed?
Well, I think the clincher for me that caused me to name my podcast that was we were living in Colorado Springs, and I did not want to move from Colorado. And I had no problems letting people know that. I was kind of throwing a temper tantrum with the Lord. I didn't want to do this. But an acquaintance, she wasn't even a friend, but an acquaintance whose husband works at the same place my husband does. She and I got to be friends, and we went out to lunch and, stuff like that. And she was asking me, does your husband love his job? And I said, yes. And she said, well, you need to change your heart, because if you don't, you are going to become like a dripping faucet to your husband. Like it mentions in Proverbs, right? That dripping faucet wife. And that was my Kairos moment. I could either say, what? You don't even know me. How dare you speak into my life this way? But immediately I thought of the scripture, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. And she was willing to tell me some hard truth. And I kid you not, ever since that moment, when I surrendered to God in that moment, my whole attitude about living in Charlotte changed.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't like ding and everything's glorious here. It was, I started noticing things that I really did like about my city. I started recognizing that God did move us here for a purpose. And I could go on and on. I mean, my special needs son, for one, has a really good school, and he's got adults that are really invested in him. I mean, that right there was a huge concern of mine by moving here. So that was my Kairos moment, that I needed to, I needed to die to my flesh and hear that hard truth, and to know that God brought us here. And when I did, my whole attitude changed.
Wow. It's amazing how God uses people to say things, and it's not always what we want to hear.
No.
I've had a few of those moments as well. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about a little bit about your study into Nehemiah. I know things have kind of changed since we set up this interview.
Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about it, but it's not on the front burner.
Right.
Again, it could be semantics, but my purpose is an intimate relationship with God. And out of that then comes my calling, like we talked about in Ephesians 2:10. He has good works for us to walk in. And sometimes, I would say most of the time, people who feel called, they start walking in that. And then when it starts getting hard, or they start experiencing obstacles, they kind of backpedal and say, oh, I must have not heard God correctly, or whatever, that person's my problem. And so if they would just change, then I could be who I'm supposed to be. But Nehemiah, when he felt called to rebuild the walls of the city, Jerusalem, he encountered all kinds of difficulties. The enemy, kept coming at him, the discouragement of the workers, and their strength was failing. And the one that ministered to me the most as a writer and as a speaker and, being visible to people was the enemy came to Nehemiah and accused him of having wrong motives for building the wall. And he was accusing him of doing it for selfish reasons. And the enemy has come to me a number of times and said, you're just doing this to make a name for yourself. You're just doing this to be seen. You're just doing this. And I have to fight that, because I will shrink back on a dime because I don't want any of that. But no, God's like, no, I've called you to this. You just keep moving and I will take care of the enemy. And Nehemiah responded to him by saying, I don't have time for you. I can't pay attention to you. I can't even come down to you. I'm busy doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So I'm creating a book and a workbook so people can work through their discouragements and process where those things are coming from, so they can unearth them and pull them out and uproot them, because God has plans and purposes for each of us. Yeah. I know a woman, and I'm trying to get her on my podcast. She has a lot of health issues, and she felt like she couldn't do anything because she was in bed a lot. But God showed her that she could start a ministry online, and it's called Bottle of Tears. And she takes these bottles and she creates beautiful things out of them, and she sends them to people who are going through hard times with the scripture that says, I hold all your tears in a bottle. And so it's like, don't tell me God hasn't called you, because he has. Let's just do what's in front of you, and God will steer you to the right, each part of the journey is what he wants for you. So I'll have that done. I've been working on that for a while. I'll have that done shortly.
I think that's kind of how we connected, is you put a thing out on Hope Writers saying, hey, is anyone interested in giving me some feedback? And I was like, oh, I'd love to see that, because it's a great story. And so we kind of connected back then. It is so true that when we feel called, we can often think it's going to be an easy road because, God called us to it. But I've not seen that in an example anywhere in the Bible. But, Satan, he's a very, very smart man, and he's going to attack the exact calling. My kids were basketball players, and so we'd always talk metaphor in sports, but I'd always say, Satan's that scout on the bench that's watching you, looking for your weakness, looking for where you have if you don't have a good shot from this area, he's going to send the team over they're going to corner you. They're going to, man up on you.
Cheri, yeah.
Well, but Satan, each unique talent you have, he's going to attack that talent. He's going to knock your knees out if you're going to try and ice skate. Right. Right. And so
that's another sport metaphor, but yes,
but so if you're getting challenged, if you're getting told, that no one wants to hear what you have to say, he's going to attack you where you feel the weakest. Let that encourage you that you're on the right path, that you're where God's called you.
And people, when I was dealing with that kind of stuff, my husband would be like, well, obviously God has something really powerful for you. Otherwise Satan would not be after you. And inside I'm like, that's not true. That's just something we tell ourselves, but it is true.
Right.
Satan, anything that represents, in Nehemiah, again, the enemy was not, quote unquote, activated until he heard that they were seeking the welfare of the Jewish people. He was not even, there was nothing going on with him. But as soon as you step out to do something for the Lord, that's when he's like, oh, pay attention to this. She's moving. She's, So yeah.
That is awesome. That's such a good point. Oh, I like that. So you talk about God moving. What are some of the ways that you have recognized that so that you're able to respond in your, we're looking, I hear a lot of people on my website and platform say, I've got to find myself. I'm looking for my purpose. So how do you recognize?
How do you recognize Kairos moments or your purpose?
Yes. Well, both, I guess.
Okay.
Throwing you out there.
Yeah. For Kairos moments, for me, it's usually something when I feel a strong reaction to. I have to step back and say, Lord, what are you saying here? That's one way that he works with me, but it's not the same for everybody. That's why I have a variety of people on my podcast, and I'm going to be doing a variety of teaching because it isn't the same for everybody. How God talks to me and gets me to recognize what he's trying to do or say isn't going to be the same for everybody.
Right.
Regarding the purpose, I wholeheartedly believe that, like I said, your purpose has already established. And as you're intimate with the Lord, you ask for his heart. Psalm 37:4, I believe it says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. I think sometimes he puts the desires in there. He puts them in there. So we don't need a green light from the Lord to say, oh, yes, do this. If he's put a desire in you to mentor moms, go mentor moms. You don't need the Lord to say, yes, I've called you to mentor moms. If he's put desire in you to help feed the poor once a week or whatever, do that. You don't need this big booming voice to say, yes, you shall go, feed the poor. It's just, he's partnering with you. He's inviting you. He's inviting you into his heart. And Nehemiah, when his brother came, he asked questions about the condition of the people. So ask questions.
I like that.
Ask questions. God, how can I minister to these people? What part can I play in, meeting the needs of this particular group or whatever?
That is so good. I love that. In a email sequence that I have for new subscribers, we do a thing called the method to finding your purpose. A lot of people like steps and actions. And the first one was a whole sequence on prayer and then practice. And, we hear practice makes perfect. I like to say practice makes purpose. You actually have to step out.
Yes.
And you actually have to, take that leap. And it looks different for so many people. Like you said, your Kairos moments are different than mine and other people's, but God needs that because there's so many needs out there. And some might just be a simple, if you are homebound, just a simple card. I have a friend who she's not homebound, but she makes beautiful handmade cards. I mean, just to get one of those is uplifting. And it's those little tiny moments that God has called us to just let others know that he is near.
Your passion will never, or not passion, your purpose will never change.
Yes.
But your calling may. I'm not doing the same thing I was doing when I was newly married.
Yes.
Matter of fact, Beth Morris started out as an aerobics instructor, So it's like our purpose is firm, but our callings will change as we grow and learn and all of that. So,
you know my tagline, right? Your roles in life will change, but your purpose is eternal.
I think I did know that. Yes.
Yeah. So many people kind of get you ask them what their purpose is and they'll start listing a list of roles or callings.
Yeah.
And if that changes, they feel like, wait, I'm no longer needed.
Right.
I no longer have purpose, but it's your purpose is what you're going to bring into each calling and into each role and
so good. Yes.
Allow that flow. So we're going to wrap up our time here. Melinda, she says your purpose will never change. Yes, that to understand that we're going to go through seasons, we're going to go through transitions, we're going to go through different callings, but the purpose God has put in our hearts and is eternal. And I love that. Is there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our people as they're facing this unworld known, right? Or world?
Oh,
yes, you know what I'm saying.
yes, I know it. Unknown world.
Thank you.
I have a Facebook group that's tied to the podcast. And I've been asking my people, where are you seeing God in all of this? We can get into panic and fear and even agitation and just why and all of this. But when we set our eyes to actually intentionally, that's the key word, intentionally look for God in circumstances and trials and all of that, we will see him every single time. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with the opposite. If we want to look for offense, Satan has no problem orchestrating things just right so you will be offended or you'll perceive rejection or whatever. It's the same with God. We have to be intentional with how we look for him. And I myself have seen it. I mean, I've gotten to know my neighbors more because of this, and it's like, that's a good thing.
Yes. So I'm going to have links. I haven't wanted to do a whole lot of distracting while we've been talking because this has been so great. And so if you're watching, I'm going to have links to everything that we've talked about. Julie has a great thing on her website. I printed it out on this is the time for creativity. Yeah. This is like you just said, you're getting to know neighbors. So what can we do during this time of quote unquote distancing, which, Satan loves relation. Us to we are alone in this time, and this is the time, that forced time to communicate and not to be distant. is it? But I just want to thank you so much, you guys. If this video blessed you and someone that it could bless, please share it. We'd love to have the word get out and bring a blessing to others. You can share the links. You can join Julie on her Facebook page and in her groups, but definitely her podcast that's out, Kairos Moments. You will be thoroughly blessed. So thank you so much for joining me and taking time. Thank your husband.
I will. Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a wonderful day and stay healthy.
Okay. You too.